Of our Slice of PI-CASC seminar. I'm Brad Romine. I'm the Deputy Director on the University side of our Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center. This monthly Slice of PI-CASC seminar series is intended to provide a platform for sharing state-of-the-art climate adaptation research and science and management applications in Hawaii and the Pacific Islands. These seminars are held on the first Tuesday every month at noon. So thank you all for being here. Here at UH Manoa and online as well. So welcome to our folks joining us online as well. For those of you here in person, please help yourself to some lunch if you haven't already. We also have pie at the end of the seminar today, keeping it with the theme of our Slice of PI-CASC seminar. So thank you to Rachel again for baking the pie. Stay for some pecan pie we have today, right? Thanks. All right, so this presentation is being recorded. It will be available on the PI-CASC website under our events page afterwards. So feel free to refer those that couldn't make it, or if you want to look at it again, check there again. For those of you online with us, please keep your microphones muted during the duration of the presentation. We will have time for questions and discussion after the presentations. So with that, it's my honor to introduce our speakers, Dr. Joe Genz, Jerolynn Myazoe, and Shania Tamagyongfal. I hope I didn't ruin that last name pronunciation too bad. I tried. Who will be sharing with us today about their work on using oral histories of Marshallese and Yapese voyaging to develop sustainable sea transport. Dr. Genz is an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. His passion for anthropology started when studying abroad in the Black Forest region of Germany during his undergraduate while enrolled at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and really blossomed after graduating and while serving as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Samoa for 2 years. During his time in the Peace Corps, his caring Samoan family welcomed him into their home and patiently guided him through the nuances of their language and culture. And this cross-cultural experience and his growing awareness of both the connectivity and differences among cultures really provided the foundation for his interests and knowledge in anthropology. Those formative years in Samoa inspired him to pursue a PhD in anthropology from the University of Hawaii here at Manoa. And Joe's work focuses on community collaboration with a canoe building organization in the Marshall Islands and the Marshallese diaspora communities in Hawaii. Joe also serves as director of the Islands of Opportunity Alliance, which is an NSF LSAMP organization supporting Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students in mentorships for students pursuing degrees. Jerolynn and Shania are graduate students in the Department of Anthropology working with Dr. Genz and within the Heritage Management Program of that department. They also serve as graduate student mentors in the Keahole STEM Scholars Program at UH Hilo. Shania was born and raised in Hilo. Her family originally comes from the islands of Yap. And Jerolynn is born and raised from the Marshall Islands, but here studying at University of Hawaii Hilo. Both of them are pursuing their certificates, or they both got their undergrads at UH Hilo, right, with certificates in Pacific Island Studies, and are now pursuing graduate degrees in anthropology with Dr. Genz. They recently traveled to and presented at the conference run by SACNAS in Portland, where it was over 4,000, 6,000 presenters, student presenters, I think you said there. Shania received an award for first place presentation in the category of traditional knowledge. So congratulations on that. That's a big deal. So with that, I will pass it to you three for your presentation, and big mahalo for being here with us today, coming over to join us today.
Thanks, Brad. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now.
Yeah. Which one are you up next?
Right, good. Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. Aloha, everybody. Again, my name is Joe Genz, and I'll let these two introduce themselves just a little bit more. But yeah, as Brad said, that's a really good introduction. I'm at UH Hilo, an associate professor in the anthropology program. and also a graduate faculty in the program of heritage management, which is what they are both studying and earning their degrees in. Do you guys want to say a little bit about yourselves, other than what Brad introduced?
Yahoe etain Jerolynn nege Myazoe ngay chuen lerigen wache maloyalat ailok enjoy in product. Hi everyone, like Brad said, my name is Jerolynn nege Myazoe. My family is from the Marshall Islands, but specifically in Wache, the atolls Wache, Maloyalat, and Ailok. And my family's clan comes from Privet.
Yeah, just hold on to it.
Just hold it,
Yeah.
okay. Mogathin, everyone. My name is Shania Tamagyongfal. Like Brad said, I was born and raised in Hilo, but I am from the village of Toru in Mop, which is the north side of Yap. And I just want to share a Yapese proverb that I center myself when I'm doing my research. Romta nagabud madamfo banial, which means when you put your hand to soil, you will have all that you need. So this is a proverb that I hold dearly to myself, in that whatever spaces that I enter, such as today, I carry my full self. Thank you.
All right, and just a little bit more on the introduction side. So yeah, it's been a really great pleasure working with these students for the past 2 years in the graduate program, and I've known them for the previous 4 years in their undergraduate. So it's really amazing that you guys are here. Thank you for being co-presenting with all of us. Based on their literature review so far in their master's projects, we actually have a co-authored publication that's in press right now. So that's going to inform part of this talk. And then, as Brad mentioned, they presented at the National Diversity in STEM conference that's organized by SACNIS back in October. And so part of what they'll talk about is informed by their poster presentations from that time. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the first several slides. Yeah. Okay, so of particular concern in the Pacific is, of course, sea level rise, which is facing so many of our local communities. This issue is, like, I think most of us are aware of this, like, can't be overstated. Some scholars refer to this as a clear threat to communities' existence. The idea here is that at some point, those rising seas will be inundating to the extent where survival may no longer be possible. And then they're thinking about migration. But even if migration happens, there may be a very big disconnect, because there's no return if those islands are inundated. So this is impacting community sense of, like, a place-based attachment, their sense of identity, their sense of well-being, philosophies, perspectives, everything's going to be challenged. And so this is then referred to as an existential threat. There are scholars, Wang Busakarum, for example, et al., in a paper recently, talked about the idea of mobilizing for change. And one of the most exemplary examples of this, with a wealth of deep knowledge, is voyaging. In terms of traditional and ancestral forms of adaptive capacity, ability to be flexible, agency, all of these things come into play. And so there's this idea, essentially this is an idea of going back to the past. It's looking back into the ancestral past, and to try to see what lessons can be learned and knowledge to be taken and reworked and repurposed and reactivated for the reality that people are experiencing today and projected in the near future. So this project is really about the adaptive capacity of ancestral seafaring networks, and specifically is taking a look at the possibility of essentially trying to reactivate sustainable sea transport. Kind of a fancy term, but it's really just wind-powered sailing canoes. But there's groups in the Pacific, especially the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport, that are looking at this not just as symbolic notions and as important as those are for cultural identity and revitalization, but actually getting more canoes out on the water that could actually have a real impact in lowering dependence upon fossil fuels and buffering in times of uncertainty, like the global pandemic that we just went through, when shipping stopped in many regions. So as part of this, we are trying to look at what kind of networks were there in the past, but more specifically, what are the forms of community engagement that were underpinning and underlying those voyaging networks and interaction spheres? And is it then possible to kind of reclaim, take back some of that or reuse some of that knowledge? And the ultimate aim here is to try to reactivate, whether it's the seafaring networks literally or the engagement that was underneath them. So just a little bit, I'm an anthropologist, so going back to deep time just for a second here, and I just want to highlight that the idea of adaptive capacity, it goes back a very long time, especially in the realm of voyaging. So just very briefly, we know that the Austronesian seafarers spread out about 3,500 years ago, as shown on this diagram. And a particular route started heading north towards the Marshall Islands, what is now known as the Marshall Islands. Some of that group kept going to the west towards Yap. Yap was also likely settled coming from Palau and also from the Bismarck Archipelago. Very complicated archaeological settlement history. But roughly about 2,000 years ago, that island region, which is today commonly referred to as Micronesia, was more or less settled. But this was also a time when sea levels were in flux. This was the latter part of the Holocene when sea levels were rising, but there was a moment when it was actually a little bit higher and the atolls were they were awashed, and then the sea levels went back down a little bit. So some archaeologists look at some of the data and talk about seeding events where voyagers would have been going by, essentially seeing these atolls that would have been awash and waited over generations for the sea levels to stabilize, planted certain crops like breadfruit, and then come back generations later. So even in this early moment, like 2,000 years ago, we have these amazing stories of adaptive capacity. And of course, I know this, most of us know this, this is really reliant upon the advancements in canoe technology and navigational systems. This is an image from the Marshall Islands, and this is a very specific type of canoe in the Pacific. It's a lateen-rigged shunting canoe system. These canoes can actually go through the lagoons, they can beach, they can also do long-distance voyaging. So some very particular developments that allowed interaction to happen after islands were settled. So just want to talk a little bit about the post-settlement interaction sphere. So this is a moment in time after islands are settled, way before the influx of Western intrusions and contact, but during these periods of time when there were networks that were activated and working. And we get a lot of this through archaeological evidence, as well as through language and place names and oral traditions. So just very briefly, and this, you guys, yes, this roughly correlates with this part of the slide is Shania's community, and the other side is Jerolynn's community. So in this area of Yap and the outer islands of Yap, which I may talk about, one of the more locally relevant terms to talk about the outer islands of Yap, which is in the current political state of the Federated States of Micronesia, is Rimatau, which can loosely be translated as people of the ocean. So in this region of the people of the sea, in the outer islands of Yap, you can see up here all kinds of different networks, the Rai that was going down to Palau with the stone money, voyages of the Metawal wool going up to Saipan and Guam, some smaller interaction spheres like the Hu and the Gao, and then the one that we're going to focus on today is the Sawe. So Sawe is a very well-known interaction sphere that linked the high volcanic island of Yap to a lot of the outer islands going to the east in a network. And this is very multifaceted, multicultural. It was a system that was religious, it was political, it was administrative. There's lots of components to the system. But one of the really critical parts of this exchange network that we'll get into a little bit today is the fact that there was tribute that was given in terms of various forms of gifts that would be given to the administrative center on Yap when flotillas of canoes would be sailing during annual tributes. And then in exchange, if there was ever a time of environmental uncertainty, like a typhoon would come through and ravage one of the islands, destroy homes and so forth, Yap would then send out or make the administrative call for relief supplies or relocation efforts. So built within this very elaborate cultural system of the Sawe is it's an adaptive capacity for dealing with environmental uncertainty and disaster. And then if we move a little bit to the west or the east, we have the Marshall Islands. Linguists look to the Marshalls as a place that has one of the highest degrees of what they call linguistic homogeneity in the entire Pacific region, meaning that it's the same language, but multiple dialects. So in the Radak chain, that's the eastern side, or the Ralik chain in the west, we have different seas that are named. And these are just a few of the examples of indigenous seascapes that have local terminology with them. So in the eastern chain, we have Engenmeto and Rakenmeto. Those are like regional spaces, yeah. And then, although the actual voyaging networks, at least the names have not been, in a way, kind of passed on through history like the Sawe and others, there is archaeological evidence and historic evidence for some widespread interaction in the Marshalls, both within those island chains, across the island chains, and is going as far north, if you can see way up there, Enenkio, which is the Marshallese name for Wake Island. Yeah, so again, the main point here is that there were systems in place, and a lot, not all of them, but a lot of them were built to buffer in times of environmental uncertainty. Basically, you know, there are ways to activate help if there was help that was needed. And then some of this is encoded through navigational teaching devices that are still in use and still remembered today. These are the Marshallese stick charts. This one is a Medo, the other one is a Rebelib. They basically represent islands in relation to wave patterns used for navigation, but these are teaching instructional devices. But the main point for here is that basically the lived experiences and memories of navigation practitioners today encode and re-represent the networks that used to be active, you know, thousands of years ago. Okay, so then just very quickly, we know that a lot of these systems went into these states of decline and then have been revitalized, especially in the mid-1900s and especially more recently. A historian named Paul Darcy talked about the fragility of seafaring institutions, which means that these knowledge systems were so specialized that it would only take a little bit to tip them over if there was like a natural disaster and they couldn't recover. So some of these knowledge systems are so specialized in how the knowledge is passed on that they can lead to decline, especially when coupled with things like epidemics and Western introduced diseases. Then we have more tangible things like the prohibitions on sailing, first from the German and then the Japanese colonial administrations. And then in the case of the Marshall Islands, we have the history of the 12-year period from 1946 to 58 for the nuclear testing program that very much halted an active training program for navigators that were on Rongelap, which is one of the places where the very famous Bravo test ended in radioactive fallout. I did put a picture up here of my recent book that actually tells the story of part of this maritime community in the Marshall Islands that is trying to actively reclaim part of their maritime heritage in the wake of the nuclear testing. So this project that these two graduate students are focusing their time and efforts on are part of our heritage management program at UH Hilo. And that program is really designed to be, it's community-based research. So that means that they're pulling academic tools, you know, they got things at their arsenal, but it's really about helping to fulfill the mission and goals of particular community organizations that are dealing with their own efforts to manage their cultural heritage. And so the two key people that we've been working with, and there's a whole range of stakeholders, but the two main ones are Larry Regatal, who is the director, president of the canoe organization called Wa'age on Yap, and then Alson Kalin, who is the director of One Island in Myazoe. It's the canoe organization translated as Canoes of the Marshall Islands in Madro. Both of these individuals are actually serving on, so Alson is serving on the committee, the academic committee of Jerolynn, and Larry Regatal is serving on the committee of Shania. They are both navigation practitioners. They have lived experiences of doing this work at sea, and working with them, and again, other stakeholders, collectively, we have developed community-based questions that are driving this project and that have been funded by PI-CASC program. So these two questions are really driving this project. So what are the lived and remembered experiences of surviving navigation of practitioners, in terms of traditional forms of community engagement, especially those practiced within living memory? And how can the adaptive capacity of ancient and historic interaction spheres impact the ability of communities to implement sustainable sea transport with traditional canoe technology and reactivate intra and inter-archipelago aid networks in times of environmental uncertainty and disaster? So again, I just want to highlight that Although those, of course, sound very academic, these are issues and that are of fundamental concern to these canoe organizations and their broader communities. And we have essentially tried to enlist graduate students who are from those regions to help solve and work through these issues from within. And I'm going to pass off to the next speaker.
Hi. So for our specific research questions, mine was how can the traditional forms of community engagement that once supported martially seafaring, especially the roles of women, be applied to contemporary climate change adaptation efforts? And for Shania, it was in what ways could modern practices of voyaging reestablish exchange networks between Yapese island hierarchies?
So like Joe mentioned, our project research design uses a community-based research approach, with community collaboration being the key focus. This is really significant to share that we are working with both our communities back home in the islands of Yap and the Marshalls, and also within the diasporic communities here in Hawaii. The research design also incorporates a decolonizing approach, which emphasizes and privileges Indigenous frameworks and ethics of research while working with the co-production of knowledge throughout the entire research process. This includes the development of the research question and research design, along with the fieldwork, writing, and dissemination processes. It is important to note that the stakeholder-driven goals for the end of this project are also being focused alongside with our academically driven questions.
So some of the methods that were implemented in both of our projects was following cultural protocols and consent. Following cultural protocol meant meeting with community leaders, which were the council of chief or landowners, landowners of a village where a practitioner lived. And in order to obtain consent, this required seeking permission out of respect from these community leaders, as well as obtaining a research permit from both historic preservation offices in the Marshall Islands and in Yap. And as part of our fieldwork, we were able to collect oral histories from both diasporic communities in Hawaii, as well as travel back to Yap and the Marshall Islands. For oral histories, we were able to interview navigation practitioners and knowledgeable community members. Once the oral histories of the narrators were collected, they were then translated and transcribed for analysis. For our projects, it was very important for us to include Indigenous research methods to ensure that, because both of our projects were dealing with Indigenous issues, it had to be done in a way that was both respectful and beneficial for both of our communities. So for me, the first Indigenous method that I used was the concept of which is storytelling, conversation, basically like having an organic conversation without it being structured like my interviews. So prior to actual interviews, you're just talking stories. And then the second one is tidram, to seek knowledge, literally meaning to seek knowledge, but a deeper meaning of it is like invoking your genealogical connections, kind of like what I was doing in the beginning when I introduced myself, my name, the islands my family comes from, and what clan do we come from. And then the last one is manpe, literally meaning offering of hands. So prior to interviewing someone, I would bring a gift to show my appreciation for their time, as well as the knowledge that they're about to share, which is in a way, I guess, seen as like reciprocity.
For me, for the Indigenous methods that I have incorporated into my research, I decided to focus on the context of how oral histories were being shared or passed down. And so there are three forms of conversational styles that the Yapese may refer to. The first is yacht, which refers to the act of storytelling, and the common setting for this form of conversation often takes place in the evening time after dinner when the young children would listen to the stories being passed on by their elders. The second is chip. This refers more specifically to the telling of a historical event, whereas with Sabathin, this refers to casual conversation or gossip, such as women gathering in the village to clean the men's houses. So these are the different types of ways stories may be shared with the Yapi's indigenous lens. So after recording and gathering all of the narratives from our summer fieldwork, we then came up with a preliminary coding scheme through inductive thematic analysis, which was done with the application of grounded theory to develop major themes and sub-themes through the use of in vivo software. So from the coding analysis, this is the coding scheme that I have developed, which emerged with 5 major themes, which are the Sawe tribute system, women as stewards of knowledge, bodies of seafaring knowledge, perpetuation, and voyaging as a metaphor. As you can see here, each one is broken down into sub-themes, but for today's talk, I will focus on the Sawe tribute system and voyaging as a metaphor, which is color-coded in orange.
My emerging theme also included 5 themes. The first one was practices of community engagement, which included kagujin, food gathering, food preservation, and yin ayojip, which was tribute. For the second one, metaphors of the canoe, it included wak gajawan kuj, which literally means a canoe that brings opportunities, but in this context, it was used as a way to describe times where they would prepare, yeah. And then wakokura is a canoe that brings ruins, like destruction, but like literally meaning that. But in this context, it was used to describe environmental uncertainties. And then the third theme was traditional roles. It involved responsibilities on a voyaging canoe, authority of that knowledge, and permission. Theme 4, cultural stewardship, which included the value of ancestral knowledge, loss of custodians of knowledge, and revitalization efforts. And the last one was safety networks that included voyaging patterns, resource extraction, and environmental knowledge.
Okay, so for me, the first theme that I decided to highlight is the Sawe system, which Joe has briefly mentioned is my main focus. So again, just to provide a quick summary, the Sawe system was the largest ancestral voyaging network of Yap that extended as far as part of Chuk's outer islands to the west, and involved many social cultural dynamics, which included being a support system for disaster relief as the area is historically prone to typhoons. For the first sub-theme, discussions of various meanings of the term Sawe were shared amongst the narrators, and this quote here highlights a common understanding referring to relationship, voyage routes, a person, basket, and land. But the main focus here was on the sense of familial relationships and kinship, which then leads to the next sub-theme of Sawe lineages and its significance. These lineages still continue today, despite the fact that the actual the voyage itself has stopped since the time of the Japanese occupation. And that's what helps enables these connections to still thrive today between the main island of Yap and the outer islands, even dealing with contemporary movement today. So they might not necessarily need to be moving because of typhoons, but if they need to like seek medical assistance, anything that they don't have resources within the outer islands, these connections still help enable that to their movement smoothly. So in keeping these relationships intact, that brings us to the third sub-theme of cultural protocols of the Sawe. These protocols were to be followed and respected every step of the way, from the tribute gifts that were being collected to the chiefly interactions throughout the outer islands to the main island of Yap. And it's important to note that when they did enter the waters of the main island, they already had their counterparts set up. So when they would come in, it is already understood that you are to follow these protocols. It is also important to note that during this time, that the Sawe voyage reached Yap until it was time to return to the outer islands, different knowledge exchanges were taking place, which is recorded within being composed, magic, medicine, canoes, and more. However, if these cultural protocols were to not be followed fully to their expectations, then there were the certain cultural beliefs and rituals that may occur, which leads us to the fourth sub-theme here. Referring back to the environmental circumstances, it was believed that they may face the consequences of typhoons and tidal waves as a result of not meeting these protocols that were set in place, and thus lead to the loss of accessibility of support and resources. So for the second theme, I chose to highlight that there are three ways that voyaging as a metaphor is used within Mayapi's community, both here in Hawaii and back home. In the first sub-theme, voyaging serves as a metaphor for cultural identity, generally referring to the history of Pacific Islanders navigating great distances and how it has come to be a source of empowerment for us with the idea that although we may not voyage like our ancestors once did, we have horizons of our own to sail for today. One prime example in my community is using voyaging as a metaphor for graduation ceremonies. The idea that we are on a journey to finish our education, adjust ourselves to whatever obstacles we face, and then return to share that knowledge and experiences that we've gained with our families and communities. This point is highlighted in this quote here, where it's immediately expressed that the canoe itself represents a voyage in life. For the second sub-theme, voyaging serves as a metaphor in helping to pass on the roles and values of navigational knowledge through teachings. This quote from Poe navigator Regatol highlights the value of respect as being one of the core values being taught through voyaging. Respect of the environment and respect of the invisible spirits of ancestors and or of deities that have supported our communities for generations. As reflected in this quote, it helps to ensure that these values and roles are being internalized through active practice of these navigational teachings and the other forms of knowledge that are connected to it. And lastly, voyaging also has come to serve as a metaphor in relation to sustainability and climate change efforts, which is the core of our project. Returning back to traditional environmental knowledge, which is rooted in our values, which this quote emphasizes, saying we look to things that are sustainable and our communities are proven sustainable when they are rooted in the values that we inherited from our ancestors.
For my coding scheme, the first theme that I decided to highlight was practices of community engagement. Throughout the interview process, all of the narrators emphasize ways that the community work together. And this included food gathering, kagujin. One of the main reason why the Marshallese voyage was to gather food. A lot of the narrators expressed how it was very common for them to voyage to the remote islets to gather and prepare food for their family. This quote by one of the women that I was able to interview, who's too shy to take a picture, Emory Shem from Namo, describes some of the ways Marshallese would gather food was by fishing, or in Marshallese, there's this thing we call kayuyu, which is the process of gathering sprouted coconuts and removing the spongy meat to use as like meal. And then the second one was food preservation. I just want to note that like for this one, I don't have a Marshallese word for it, like the sub-theme 1 and sub-theme 3, just because in Marshallese, there's different words for how you preserve different types of food. So for example, preserved breadfruit is buiro, preserved pandanus paste is tienugun, and preserved fish is egamanakanok. And these were just some of the things that were highlighted in this quote by Aladdin Galen. In the event that a tropical storm or drought devastated the islands, he explained how the communities in the Marshall Islands were often prepared through preserving of food. For the third one, this was either used tribute for the chiefs or tribute for specific atoll alliances. This was just
Another significant points that some of the narrators were highlighted. This other quote by Aladdin, in this context, this quote is used here to describe a tribute system, how a tribute system works. So whenever a community presented a tribute, the chief would then share it with the landowners, who would then distribute it to the atoll communities. This was done as a way to maintain alliances and relationships, and the alliances and relationships would then be created, I guess, for safety networks whenever atolls encountered environmental circumstances. For safety networks, some of the narrators indicated that trading agreements were established beforehand, either by the chiefs or through familial ties. These arrangements allowed different atoll communities to voyage to specific locations. There are three sub-themes highlighted here, which are voyaging patterns, extraction of resources, and environmental knowledge. For voyaging pattern, this quote by Aladdin Kelen describes a specific safety network between Bigini and Ronglap, exchanging resources. A lot of the other narrators also has similar stories of neighboring atolls also sharing resources. For resource extraction, they spoke about voyaging to either neighboring atolls or islets to extract resources. This quote by Marlon Toren from Ebon describes safety networks that was established in Ebon and the islets surrounding it because of familial connections. This was also mentioned by other narrators, where they described how some of the reasons why they voyaged was to the other islets was to extract resources because it belonged to their family. The last sub-theme, environmental knowledge, was mentioned frequently, with several narrators explaining how environmental knowledge within navigational chance was crucial for reaching a specific location within a voyaging network. This quote by Aladdin Kelen, he mentions how there's chance for all different types of storms, and in one particular chant he recited, he discusses Kabila, which is a tropical storm that resembles an unexpected typhoon. In his interview, he discusses the importance of paying attention to your environmental surrounding, especially when you're on a canoe. Within the practices of voyaging, there are other forms of knowledge interwoven into community resilience. So some solutions to climate change reside within Indigenous people through their lived experiences and ancestral memories of developing systems of mobilizing collective responses in times of uncertainty. Traditional canoes afford sustainable sea transport, and surviving knowledge enables the possible reactivation of older inter-island networks based on kinship and customary forms of resource management. Based on the oral histories and experiences of practitioners, some of the key aspects of community engagement include the Soe system, voyaging as a metaphor, and cultural practices and safety networks.
So in closing, we would like to acknowledge and thank USGS, PI-CASC, NSF, LSAP, WAM, Waige, Hilo, the Keaholoa STEM Scholars Program, the Cultural and Historic Preservation Office of the RMI, the Yapse Historic Preservation Office, the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport, and Micronesians United Big Island. Kumargad, and thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and sharing all that with us. Really, really appreciate you doing that. We have plenty of time for questions today, and why don't we start with anybody here in our audience who might have a question? Please go ahead. We will pass around these microphones so the audience can hear as well.
For sharing your very meaningful presentation with everybody. My question just has to do with what kind of opportunities have you had to kind of share this information with the different communities in the diaspora here in Hawaii?
So we are also part of the Kealoha STEMs college program, and I feel like that is definitely one way to connect with the student community over at UH Hilo, especially because it promotes like Indigenous scientists. So I feel like sharing it with those students is very impactful also because, you know, we're students in college, we're trying to figure out what we're trying to do and to whom we want our work to reach out to. Also, like we've mentioned, community collaboration. So for me personally, I always make sure to go back to my my community, my elders back home, and you know, not only share what I'm learning to see what to compare with their knowledge, but also to kind of like as a point of cross-checking for me to make sure that I am on the right path and the way that I am sharing it within the academic spaces that I'm walking into is culturally being respected and the way that they want our stories to be told, especially myself being a Yapese person and also being a part of the diaspora. So it's very like personally deeply rooted as well. And also like we've mentioned in the beginning, going over to Portland for the SACNAS conference. That was like a new like community. Being part of that was like definitely very eye-opening. And to see how traditional knowledge is being valued within those spaces as well. So yeah.
I can touch on yeah, just a small thing to add on is that we built into the PI-CASC program a stakeholder meeting. So once we get closer to their endpoint with their master's projects, pretty much everyone that was on that acknowledgement plus other people would all be pulled together to basically kind of talk through these results and then take those next steps to see how those communities can actually use that information. So, and one of them, as Shania mentioned, is Micronesians United Big Island, which on Hawaii Island is kind of it's a nonprofit that helps to connect to a lot of the diasporic communities in terms of outreach and dissemination of information. So we actually built one of those organizations within the project too.
Great, thank you. We'll come back to the room. I want to see if there's any questions online. I'm not seeing any in the chat. I do see a lot of virtual applause hands in the chat. Great job. But if you're online, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or just come off mute if there's any questions. Pause for a moment for that. Okay, not seeing online, but we'll come back to you all. I see one here in the room. Thank you. Oh, I was.
I think he meant someone else.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Come back, please. Yeah.
congratulations to both of you. Well, all three of you, but especially your students for an amazing presentation and very, very important work. I just had a question for Jerolynn, and I know we've talked about this before, but if you could talk a little bit more about your research with women and the role and place of women in these networks and both historically and in the present. Just be interested to hear more.
I think something that like in creating the themes, I was kind of like trying to decide whether or not if I should have like the women's role as like its own theme, but I feel like from the interviews that I was able to conduct, it wasn't a thing that was like, how do I describe it? Like it was so common to like, yeah, it was a meta theme. Like it was very common where it wasn't just like, oh, this were the women's role and this was the men's role. Like it was like a community.
Very pervasive.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Good, thank you. That in and of itself is really interesting and exciting to learn. So thank you.
Thanks for the question. Cindy, I think you had a question.
Yeah, actually, my question was similar, and I was curious if there were different roles that women and men played in regards to natural resource management, if they had, so, yeah.
I feel like within YAP, like for women, in terms of like natural resource management, it's more so with like gardening and agriculture, food preservation. Those practices were meant for the women. Whereas for the men, it was more so like anything with like more manual labor, right? Of course, like, you know, cutting down a breadfruit tree to like make the hull of the canoe, that kind of thing. But like for my island, it was very interesting that the women's roles were spoken about like being on land, and whereas the men is like more in tune with the sea. But that's where one thing that stood out to me with women as navigators, their role is, which goes back into the title of that theme, which is women as stewards of knowledge. They're the ones that held on to the navigational knowledge in order to pass down in case, you know, like the men don't make it back from a voyage or so on and so forth. So that was their part. Other than, I know your question was more focused on natural resource management, but I just wanted to highlight that as well. Thank you.
Mine was sort of like different from hers. Like I said earlier, it wasn't really focused on, the answers were really focused on like specific gender roles. It was just like everybody did everything. Like they did agriculture, they built canoes. It was just like, it was like a community effort.
Okay, thank you. I see Larry Ragatel's hand up online. Larry, something to add or a question? Larry, want to come off mute and go ahead?
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. And so I just wanted to congratulate both Jerolynn and Shania for a job well done. And Joe, thank you for guiding them. I wanted to also kind of add into the answers provided by the two of them with respect to the role of women in all of this. And I don't think we need to look too far. They're standing right in front of you. In the form of Shania and Jerolynn. To us in the practice that we do, we always understand that the women sit on all of it. You know, they may be silent in terms of management of resources and technology transferred from one generation to the other, but we also know that, and often we compare them to that rock. On each island, there is always that big rock out on the reef that it gets pounded by the wave after storms, and it just stays there. And so I guess in a way, you can be grateful and thankful that the women are always around to carry the story forward. And so to me, I think having Jerolynn and Shania as the first two that I know of who are from our part of the world, who are now going to put their hands down on paper, write our story. Something to applaud for and to be grateful for. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I don't know if you have any response to that, but no need if you don't have anything. Let's see if there's any other questions in the room. Cindy, you have another one. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. You had mentioned that there was a ban on sea voyaging from the Germans, I think. What was that for?
As far as I know, it was both during the Japanese and before them with the German colonial administrations. And there's plenty of sources that go into this, the historical archives, the oral traditions that have been recorded after the war. I think my memory of that was that there was a perceived anxiety there was an anxiety of the colonial administrators that, and the research that I looked into is mostly for the Marshallese, but I think it would apply across the region, but that those navigators and seafarers were not capable. They didn't really have like strong skills. That was their perception. So if they would have allowed traditional navigation to continue, there would have been people lost at sea, would have been more recovery efforts. So basically they put the ban on any kind of like seafaring activities more to kind of maintain control. I think that's my understanding. There were these moments of resistance, especially when the treatment during the Japanese time turned more militaristic, and there were stories of certain islanders that would try to leave, you know, at nighttime, get in their canoes and go. And a lot of it is actually stories of women, because the men were already being killed or worked, right? Like, so there were stories of women getting the canoes and leaving with their families during the time just before the end of the war. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Yes, in the back, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Joe, Jerolynn, and Shania. I just want to really like mahalo you guys and say how brilliant I think your work is. As a PhD student, I feel like I can absolutely learn from your research and your approaches and methodology. So thank you. I was hoping that you folks might be willing to answer sort of what has this research meant to you? And if you could sort of share like how doing the research has been for you as researchers and students. And scholars.
Well, first off, thank you. I feel like, to be honest, like when I first started this master's degree, I was clueless. I just wanted to like take this. I took it as an opportunity to not only further my undergrad degree in anthropology, but also from a more personal take of like rerouting myself into my own culture. Because growing up here in Hawaii, I did feel very disconnected from my identity as a Yapese person. And I feel like the more that we've been doing this research, it's been proving to me that this is why we need more Indigenous people to take up spaces like this, you know, especially with the issue of climate change. You know, us coming from small islands, we are the ones who are going to face the impacts directly, if not already in certain places. So I feel like to not only be an Indigenous person, but to also speak for your people and make sure that they are being represented in the best way. That is what has really been what I've taken away from my master's degree so far. Thank you.
For me, it's been similar to Shania, but I think something that like always sticks with me every time I'm like especially going back home right now, is like seeing how like the community has been like so welcoming, that there's actually like someone who's like young and is Marshallese and like has come back to see like the traditional knowledge like sort of like declining, and like I guess like seeing someone who's like eager, like hearing how they're like, thank you for not forgetting where you came from. It meant more to me than what I thought it would before starting this. Because I feel like starting this, I was kind of like thinking through like academic lens, but I feel like being able to actually work closely with my community and like them being able to like ground me in like my roots has been very eye-opening and helpful.
Great question, thanks. I have one question. You know, your work is focused on Yap and the Marshall Islands, but you know, if you're in Hawaii, I wonder if you've had opportunities for shared learning interaction with the Hawaiian voyaging navigation communities at all yet, or if you plan to.
No, I wouldn't say that, like, well, for me personally, I wouldn't say that I've worked closely yet with the Hawaiian voyaging organizations here, but I have met people that are part of it. And in sharing our projects, there is a lot of sense of eagerness and wanting to build connections, especially with referring to like the time that Papa Ma was here and helping with the voyaging renaissance. And I think finding a way to strengthen that cultural exchange that had taken place and to help provide a more like positive outlook as to what we can learn from one another would definitely be another way that we can focus this project on. But yes, definitely we do feel the support, yeah, when engaging with people related to those communities.
Similar answer to her. I haven't really engaged with any of the voyaging communities here in Hawaii, but meeting people like Darian was one of them. We got to talk to her. Meeting Celeste Howe. So it was kind of cool to see like the stories that like they were able to share and seeing how similar they are to our own. Like,
Yeah, just
And just to highlight though, with that question that some of this is also, I don't know how to phrase this, but like removing a little bit of that agency on their part, because a lot of it is dependent upon the community organization's goals. And so I know like Larry's program, Pull Navigator Larry with the Wa'agi program, and Elsa and Kaylin with Wanaving and Module, they're connected. You know, they are part of other groups. You know, we took this trip to Stanford University to be kind of representing part of these groups in another place recently, about a year ago. So the organizations themselves are very, I think, very open, but ultimately, like I'm kind of talking as advisor, right? Like part of their role as students right now is not necessarily to be that direct line to make those connections, because they're kind of like the face and the representation of their communities. They're an extension. So it's really like a conversation within their communities first about, you know, what kind of relationships they want to develop and promote. And then they would then likely be the charge of it, but it's not, I'm kind of saying it's not really up to them, right? They're kind of like part of their communities in those decisions. So yeah, they said it in a good way.
Yes, thank you.
thank you. We should wrap it up. It's almost 1 o'clock. I want you all to join me in another round of applause. So yeah, this does conclude our Slice of PI-CASC seminar for this month. Please join us again in person. Our next one will be January 9th at noon. So we'll be back after the holidays.
second Tuesday.
Yes. Did I say that wrong?
No, that's right.
Yep, second.
But it's the second Tuesday.
Oh, right. We moved it up.
Because it's January.
Yeah, away from New Year's Day a little bit. So the second Tuesday, January 9th at noon will be our next one with Dr. Ryan Longman, who will talk from the East West Center, who will be sharing with us on the Hawaii Climate Data Portal. If you're online with us, please take a moment as you log off to share any ideas you might have. We'll have a quick survey pop up. We might have ideas for future seminars. Look out for reminders and links to talk throughout the year, or do check in at our PI-CASC website for upcoming seminars through the spring. Those of you here, please stick around for a slice of pie if you'd like. Thank you again for Rachel for helping us to organize and the baking. And we look forward to seeing you all in January. And thank you again to our speakers.
Thank you.